Sometimes one decision, just one, can separate a life of endless failure from a life of unforgettable victory. But the price of that decision is always courage. Today, I will tell you a story of a young man that will change you forever. Once, in a village surrounded by vast forests and distant mountains, lived a young man whose life had been marked not by victories, but by failures. He was known among his people not for his strength or wisdom, but for the mistakes that clung to him like shadows. Every attempt he made seemed to crumble before it began. When he tried to farm, the crops withered. When he tried to trade, he was cheated. When he tried to learn a craft, his hands trembled and faltered. The whispers of the villagers grew louder with each failure, until he began to believe them. Perhaps he thought he was destined to fail. One evening, when the weight of humiliation grew too heavy, he decided to leave. He would walk into the forest, away from the eyes that judged him, away from the voices that mocked him, away from the place where his name meant only defeat. With nothing but a small bundle of food, he stepped beneath the trees and began a journey that would change his life forever. The forest was unlike the village. It was alive with sounds and secrets. The air was thick with the scent of damp earth, the rustle of unseen creatures, and the call of birds hidden among the branches. At first, the young man felt afraid. Every crack of a twig made him flinch. Every shadow made him doubt his choice. But as he walked deeper, something stirred within him. A quiet voice that whispered, "Here, no one knows you. Here, you are free to begin again." He walked until his legs ached and the sun dipped low. Hunger gnawed at him, and he realized he would soon need food. He searched clumsily for fruit, for roots, for anything he could eat, but his hands failed him again. What he found was rotten or bitter or out of reach. Anger swelled inside him. Even here, he thought, I cannot succeed. He collapsed against a tree, tears stinging his eyes. But as night fell and the stars appeared, something remarkable happened. He noticed the silence between his sobs. He noticed the trees standing tall despite storms, the river flowing endlessly despite rocks in its path, the fireflies glowing despite the darkness. None of these things were perfect. The trees bore scars of lightning, the river bent around obstacles, the fireflies' light flickered unevenly. Yet, together, they created beauty. In that moment, he realized his failures did not mean the end. Perhaps, like the forest, he could bend, scar, flicker, and still move forward. The next morning, hunger pushed him to try again. This time, he watched carefully. He noticed how birds pecked at certain berries and avoided others. He followed their lead and found fruit that nourished him. For the first time, he had succeeded. Small, but enough to plant hope. Days turned to weeks, and the forest became both his teacher and his test. He built a small shelter with branches, clumsy at first, but sturdier with practice. He learned to track animals, not to hunt them, but to find water where they drank. He fell, failed, and tried again, until slowly, quietly, he grew stronger. One day, as he explored deeper, he came across a river raging with violent current. Its roar was deafening, its spray fierce. On the other side, he saw fruit trees heavy with food and land that seemed safer to rest. Yet the river stood between him and that promise. The young man felt his old doubts return. I cannot cross this. I will fall. I will fail again. He sat for hours, paralyzed by fear. But then he remembered. Every step he had taken in the forest had been built on failure. Each failure had led him closer to survival. Perhaps this river was here not to stop him, but to test him. With trembling hands, he gathered fallen branches and vines. He tried to weave a raft. His first attempt sank. His second broke apart. But he did not stop. For the first time in his life, he refused to let failure define him. On his third attempt, he tied the branches tighter, braced the raft with stones, and pushed it into the water. The current fought him, pulling, dragging, threatening to devour him. He paddled with all the strength in his arms, his heart pounding like a drum, and though the river roared, he refused to surrender. At last, soaked, exhausted, but alive, he reached the other side. He stumbled onto the shore and collapsed, his chest heaving, his body trembling. But in his eyes burned a new fire. He had failed twice, but on the third attempt, he had crossed. This was not the end of failure. He knew life would test him again, but now he understood something he never had before. Failure was not the opposite of victory. It was the path to it. Weeks later, he returned to the village, no longer the man who had left. His back was straighter, his eyes clearer, his hands steadier. The villagers stared, for he carried with him an air they had never seen. Confidence born not from easy triumphs, but from battles fought and survived in silence. When asked where he had been, he simply said, "Into the forest." And though he did not boast of his struggles, the truth shone in his presence. The man they once mocked as a failure had become someone who had learned the greatest lesson of all, that courage is not the absence of fear, but the decision to move forward despite it. Remember this: life will place rivers in your path. Some will be shallow, others deep, some gentle, others wild. You may fall, you may stumble, you may fail more than once. But if you dare to face them, if you dare to try again, your failures will not bury you. They will build you. So the next time you stand before your own river, remember the young man in the forest. Remember that one brave decision to keep going, to try again, can turn failure into victory. And if this story has touched you, if it has reminded you of your own strength, then I invite you to join me here at Life Lessons Library. Subscribe so that together we can walk through more stories, more journeys, and more truths that remind us we are stronger than our fears, braver than our doubts, and closer to victory than we think.